one of my favorite tools. It's called a verbal highlighter. And what you do is you imagine what you're going to say as a script. Sometimes people write out their scripts or key phrases or value propositions and they work on them. And if you were doing a script, you would use a yellow highlighter to say, this is the word that deserves emphasis. So the company you were telling me about that you run maps sales targets, if I'm saying this correctly, right? We can tell you, let's say we can tell you the exact location of your people. You wouldn't say we can tell you the exact location of everyone. You'd say, we can tell you the exact location. That is the part of the sentence that deserves the verbal highlighter.
This is Outside Sales Talk, the best podcast for outside salespeople. I'm your host, Steve Benson, and we're here to chat with the world's top sales experts so that you can get their best sales tactics to level up your game. Welcome back to Outside Sales Talk. I've got Juliet Funt with us, and she's going to tell us about nailing your virtual presentations. Juliet, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, just by way of introduction, Juliet is a globally renowned keynote speaker and founder of the efficiency training firm, Juliet Funt Group. She's brought her powerful concepts to renowned companies such as Spotify, National Geographic, Nike, Sephora, and ESPN. Juliet is also the author of the best-selling book, A Minute to Think, Reclaim Creativity, Conquer Busyness, and Do Your Best Work, which was nominated for the Next Big Idea Club. I guess let's jump right into it, Juliet. First question I had for you. For salespeople who have a background in outside sales, how can they bring the skills that they've already acquired into the virtual world? And by way of background, so many of our listeners are outside salespeople, but many of them also do find themselves doing Zooms or Google Meets with customers when they're on the road or last minute, et cetera. So some of them can only be in person when they do things, but others of them have kind of a hybrid situation where sometimes they're virtual, sometimes they're face to face.
Well, there are two main disclaimers that you need to give before you talk to salespeople about virtual. And one is, do we have to worry about virtual anymore because in person is coming back? You said most of them do both. I believe that from now on, every sales professional has to be bilingual in these two skills. We will forever now be selling partly in person and partly on the road. And they're linked skills. It's like cooking and baking. You can be a really good cook, but you might not master baking and vice versa. So taking the skills that they already have and repurposing them for virtual will not be an automatic transition. And that's really the hardest thing for most salespeople to accept is there is a bit of a new learning curve. What happened during the pandemic was we all got shoved into this medium and everyone settled in on this good enough level where we kind of all were here. So we just started good enough and then everybody froze at good enough. And now we live the whole world at good enough. And that's a problem because that doesn't allow salespeople to differentiate. It doesn't allow them to really play their best game for their biggest clients. So there is a little bit of a learning curve. The other sort of level setting topic that we have to talk about is whether you sell in a presentation, like a monologue, and whether you sell in little pieces doesn't really matter. You still are going to need the skills of the medium. We say sometimes if you had a long red string that you imagine as a monologue presentation, as I might sometimes give for 20 or 30 minutes to a corporate audience, you chop that up into little bitty pieces, you would still want the string to be high quality and vibrant and of great color. So if you sell in sentences, or if you sell in paragraphs, or if you sell in a giant presentation where you have a deck and you're presenting, doesn't really matter. You still want to be really good and really comfortable and have as much in-personness as you can. You want to have a vibe, like you're as close to in person as possible within the constraints of the medium.
Well, it's a great analogy too. I mean, I think it's important that a salesperson can stand up and do the full end-to-end pitch with no questions to a larger group of people. And that same salesperson needs to go through the same presentation effectively, but in little bits of string, as you said, if they're one-on-one, because it's much more about asking questions and kind of giving the bits of string at the right bits of string at the right time. Whereas if they were
Right.
that you could be speaking at a conference to a whole bunch of people and you have to give the full piece of strength. And so it's analogous in that to the need to be able to give a great virtual presentation as well as a great in-person presentation.
Yes, and the places where people embarrass themselves in this medium are also present long string, short string. It doesn't matter. It things about eye skills like eye contact, reading, confidence, body language, use of your voice, slides specifically designed for virtual. It doesn't really matter whether you're talking a long time or a short time. These are skills we all now have to learn.
Well, I guess why don't we talk about some of those skills that as an outside salesperson you may have learned to do in person. How do they translate in the virtual world?
Well, some of them don't translate at all. Some of them are brand fresh, spanking new, like making eye contact into a camera. There's no translating. There's a lot of discomfort, to be honest, in taking that comfort you have when you're reading a room and watching the people and getting a sense and using your body. And now you have to put it all into this box. And it's really, really different. But hopefully we'll have enough time together. We can break down some of the hardest and scariest areas and really let people upskill themselves so they feel more confident.
Yeah, and you certainly lose things, right? You lose the ability to see someone's body language. You lose the ability to see, I mean, I've literally seen people scoot back in meetings. They don't like something so much, or scoot forward because they like something so much. It's
Oh, interesting.
and it's there you lose, so you do lose, you lose the water cooler chat on the way to the room, and the before the meeting, after the meeting chat, and you lose, coffee afterwards that happens spontaneously. But you gain things too in a virtual world. You gain that VP that wouldn't have shown up at the real meeting shows up because it's virtual, because they're actually
Yeah,
visiting
that's
the
true.
plant. They're visiting the plant in West Texas today. They actually may show up because it's a virtual meeting, and so you gain things and lose things, and moving to in going, when you're selling and presenting virtually, I think.
And I think some of the unwillingness to get good in this medium has to do with this feeling of isn't good enough good enough? Let's say I sell 75% of the time in person and 25% on virtual, and it's kind of been good enough through the pandemic. But that's like saying, would you take 25% of your leads and just set fire to them on purpose? You wouldn't, because every lead is important and every conversation is important.
And yeah, I couldn't agree more. Learning to maximize all these, you got to. A part of being great at sales is having all the tools in your belt. You got to be able to, you know, find new deals, qualify new deals, pitch deals, close. Do ROI analyses. Keep existing customers happy. There's so many tools in the belt, and I think this is just one more. And it's not new to the pandemic. I mean, I remember learning to use, it wasn't Zoom at the time, it was WebEx,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
you know,
Love that one.
15 years ago, and it would freeze and didn't work. And but in certain, usually I was selling face to face, but every once in a while, you'd sell, and often it's based on the customer, right? If you're like, oh well, let's do it virtually because I'm here, and John's over there, and Jane's in that state, and then the Europe team's going to be dialing in, and it becomes a key skill.
And one thing you have to understand is that as costs are limited in this particular time in history and people are tight, they're going to limit travel and they're going to make it harder to meet in person. So, this is yet one more reason that we have to get good at this. And we will talk about the talent of it, but I think we should probably start with production because that's where people want to check the box of make sure they're not embarrassing themselves or missing something important in the world of production,
Hmm.
meaning
It's
the
probably
lighting, camera
easier
angles.
too. It's hard. It's easier to make, to get the right tools, right? To get the light and the right camera, and what. So tell us about the basics. Tell us about production.
Sure. It's going to be interesting because we're going to have this on YouTube, but it's also audio only. So I have to keep remembering that we're not going to make any physical references. But the most important thing about your production values is that you have intentionality and that you don't slide into that sloppiness. Now, we talked about the pandemic. One of the things that happened is that there was this really beautiful authenticity that got birthed in the pandemic where we all were thrust into each other's lives. But a lot of sales professionals confused the intimacy of that with sloppiness. And so we still want our first impression to be one that is clean and subliminally powerful. So the ways that we do that are we look at camera angle. We look at lighting. We may look at an upscale camera, but that's not even really so necessary. And we want to look at audio. So those are the main areas that I'll touch on. Camera angle is a really big one, and also camera spacing. A lot of people, if you take a snapshot of yourself on Zoom, take a screenshot, you'll notice that many people are using only the lower part of their screen. Their head is way far down, and then there's all the space above them. The first thing that you want to do is you want to look at your own self view in whatever platform that you use. Sit up straight, look directly into the camera that you're using as an experiment. We'll get to eye contact in a minute. And just make sure that you're taking up most of the space. You should have a little bit of what they call headroom above you, maybe a small slice. And then mainly you should be the star in the middle. If you notice that you're only in the lower half of your screen, you're losing a lot of potential intimacy because your eyes are smaller and your smile is smaller, and all those human primordial skills that we use to connect with each other are all shrunken. So that's the first thing, is camera angle and how you set up your camera. You don't want to be looking down at the camera. You don't want to be looking up at the camera. If we can see your ceiling or ceiling fan, then you know that your camera angle is too far upward. We don't want to see up your nose. That's a famous Zoom problem. So
Well,
think
and
of it like you're
one
in a
thing is
chiropractor's office.
some cameras, some computers come with great cameras, some computers come with terrible cameras, right? So like if you have an Apple, they come with a decent camera. If, like I have a PC and it's garbage, so I have an external camera as a result that I use for this.
Yes, external is great, but it's such there's so many things to worry about before you get to upgrading the quality of the actual camera. I'm going to leave that either for last or leave that off for now, because so we've got the way that we're sitting and we've got the way that we're taking up space. The next most important thing is your audio, because audio is the intimacy with which you reach out to somebody. It's how you feel like you're kind of with them. And this is where I would upgrade and spend the money on something external, a USB plug-in mic, a Blue Yeti, a lavalier, something that you can travel with that is not just your external microphone. It makes you sound, if you use AirPods or headphones, it can make you sound a little bit better, but the AirPods are rather robotic.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind the cord, a plugged in headphone is a good bet. But a Blue Yeti microphone is a pretty inexpensive piece of equipment, and you can travel with it. I do. It
Mhm.
takes up a little bit of wardrobe space, but it's worth it. What
Yeah,
you can also
I
do.
travel with mine whenever I'm going to be recording a podcast. But that's what I use. I use a Blue Yeti. But if I'm just talking on the phone, I'll just use my plugged in headset, which is, but it's not as good. I mean, in the if I'm on my phone, not talking through my computer, but talking, then I'll use my AirPods. But those are the most tinny, I think, of like the of all those choices. Plugged in is
They are.
definitely superior.
They are. And I use my AirPods when I'm on the road as well. We all have this is all has to happen within the world of reality, but we're going to aspire to at least have the knowledge that in every area of a production, we're going to be intentional again, not just accidentally doing anything.
Well, my reality is that I put my AirPods through the washing machine about 2 weeks ago, so that's the reality that I'm living in right now.
That's really funny. I know in a minute we're going to talk about ABC level presentations. So reality means that we don't always put this kind of effort into everything, but I'll just finish background and lighting and then we can get there.
Mhm.
You want a background. A lot of conversations right now about the virtual backgrounds because they're getting better. You will use them when you have to. You will use them when you're racing into a hotel and you don't have time to set up, or when something's really ugly behind you. But in general, they create a small halo around you. And as you move in and out, you kind of look like an apparition and you're coming in and out. So when you can, it's wonderful to set up a background behind you that's real. I'll give you my favorite tip, although the audio only folks won't hear you, is the painting behind me is $120 knockoff. You go to iStock Photo, you find any piece of abstract art, and then you blow it up big enough that it is most of your background. You can't travel with it on the road, but for your home office, it's a wonderful, wonderful tip. On the road, we'll talk about, I know in a minute, there's a lot of ways to set up. Use a background that is not distracting, not busy, not too personal. We don't want necessarily kids' photos or alma maters or things that are drawing our eyes into a lot of complexity or words. Just clean, simple, and styled. You also don't want nothing behind you. We call that in the industry a hostage video. That's when you're just standing in front of the wall and there's nothing there. And then the last one I
That all
touch
makes sense,
on.
and what you have really does look nice. It's got, like, some nice cool colors, and it's, it's a nice composition, but it's also behind a flower. I'm just describing it for the listeners,
Yeah, I've got
but
fresh flowers to my right. That's my treat every week. And an abstract painting behind me that's gold and blue. Very little else behind me. And this makes up for a lot of places where you can't really style can't put cute little stylized elements behind you.
that makes sense, yeah. And I totally agree with you on the halo and the automatic background. Although it's gotten better over the last few years, it's still it looks funny. And also I've noticed that it takes more processing power. Like sometimes it's more
Oh,
likely to make you break up. It actually I think they're doing it on the hardware side because well, at least I've noticed that it causes more breakups than if you don't use it.
interesting. The virtual background also, I believe, to be a low status choice compared to a styled physical background. And you always want to think about subliminal status. You want to walk into every virtual room with as much status as you can. So the blurred version is new, the one that's just blur, and I will say I like that even better than some of the ones that have an image behind them, but use them when you have to, and maybe think about styling a home office when you can. Last thing that we just want to throw in is lighting. A lot of people know that you can buy a ring light. What they don't know often is that it's best to buy two ring lights that go on either side and cross on your face. When you have one ring light, you either usually have to put it in the wrong place or you have to stare into it all day long, which is
Mm,
incredibly taxing to have the ring light in front of you. That's why another reason why people get so exhausted in the medium. Just get two, and they should be crossing on your face. You can again put your own self view up and look at all of these things. How does my background look? How does my lighting look? Am I taking up most of the frame, etc.?
very interesting. And a lot of our listeners are on the road, and so they everything needs to be mobile for them, right? Because
Yes.
they're doing this from a hotel room, et cetera, because they're field salespeople. So I think it needs to be small mobile things like and even the Blue Yeti is kind of a hog in terms of it's not going to fit nicely in your carry on necessarily, but the camera is small and these little ring lights are pretty small too.
They are. I'll tell you how I travel. Let's do ABC first because it's going to influence what we talk about in the travel
Okay.
section. But I'll tell you all about actually some of the most uh, viral posts I've ever done on social media are the weird pictures of when I'm traveling and setting up my Zoom and using a ice bucket upside down and a baby chair in one Airbnb and all sorts of fun tools to get cameras to the right spot. But I think we should do the levels first because that will help listeners figure out how to spend their energy even on the road.
Sounds great. And this is
This
you're
is,
talking about the ascending levels of virtual
yeah,
presentations that I've heard you talk
yes,
about?
yes, it's such important content because if we don't talk about levels, what happens is everyone thinks, all right, I'll get good at virtual, I surrender. And then they put the same amount of effort and energy into every virtual conversation. And it's exhausting because this is an exhausting medium. So the levels are ascending C, B, A. C is not a presentation at all. It's just a conversation. It could be you're hanging out with your team. It could be you're on with a client that you know very well already. C has an element of casualness. You could pick up the laptop, you could go make coffee. Mostly it's internal. It's not even necessarily a sales moment. No need to expend a lot of production or performance energy on C. But B, we move up a level. This means I have a goal. I want to build something. I want a relationship. I have something I want to happen by the end of the call. Now we've ratcheted up a notch and we have to use more effort and energy. And A is this is the big pitch, the big client, the one you've been waiting for. You can kind of think of it like a live conference. C, you're chatting in the hallway level energy. B, you're maybe a panel or a breakout speaker. And A, you're the keynote. And every one of the things that we'll talk about today should be on a dial only ratcheted fully up for A less so for B, and not at all for C, because we're going to exhaust ourselves in this medium.
That makes a ton of sense. And you hear a lot about Zoom fatigue and how much it's funny because I talk to a lot of field salespeople, and it's you would think that it's more exhausting to like go out on the road and drive around and see eight customers, but I've heard time and time again it's so much worse to it's exhausting to get on Zoom meet those same eight meetings, but on Zoom, or it's way harder. And
Yeah.
I think part of that is just the break of being in the car is like very cleansing of the mind or something. I don't know, but it's I've heard of all y- people that have been selling for 20 years, they didn't have any fatigue from going to see people in person, but you put people on Zoom, and maybe it's just that you're not connecting with people the same way, you're not looking at them, you're not in the same room as them. I think that's energizing for a lot of people. But you
Oh, they
definitely
love
hear.
it. Yeah, they love it, and here it's so hard in so many ways. One of the things we talk about frequently is getting people to turn the cameras off further into the sales process, unless you're on the close where you need to see their face when you see that they say the number. In that middle part, sometimes audio is better. Sometimes just a good old fashioned phone call is better. We got tricked now into this medium into thinking that we have to be on here all the time. When you go to audio only, you say, hey, it's been a long day of Zoom. Let's rest our eyes and turn our cameras off. Sometimes people listen better. There's information and data coming out now that what they call the collective intelligence of a team working on a meeting is higher without the cameras on, because you're not looking at your hair and you're not looking at their cat, and there's a million things that you're not distracted by.
Yeah, I love turning the camera off, and I always like a lot of my meetings are actually internal with people that work at the company, and I often will have my camera off just to like show that it's okay, because I think it is kind of a trick that this was a good idea. Like I don't think it necessarily like having a bunch of little
Oh, yeah.
squares of little like I know we all know what each other look like. I saw you in the office last week. Like we don't need the little squares all the time. And
Now, I will say though that starting a new relationship with a prospect or closing, I think are very good times to have the camera on, because you do want to watch that body language. You do want to be understanding everything that they're feeling.
yeah. I
So
think
now
different
we can flip
companies
back.
also just have cultures around this at this point. Like some companies, it's like, management has drilled in during COVID, we got to have our cameras on, cameras on, cameras on. And other places, people are like, no, no, we don't need to have our cameras on. You don't need to see me. I don't need to see you. It's fine. Like, so
Yeah, I get in
you kind of
trouble.
have to match what your customers. If I join a call with a customer and a customer has their camera on, I turn my camera on. But if it's with an employee, I'll be like, oh, we don't have to do this.
I like that mirroring. It's smart to do. I get in trouble sometimes because I keynote on this a lot and do virtual keynotes on the content. And if I'm on camera talking about turn your cameras off, sometimes I've walked into an environment where the executives are really stuck on camera all the time. So
Yeah.
you have to be a little bit cautious.
Well, I think there's so many challenges around like people being engaged, and especially during COVID. I think it was a rough time, and I think there was a lot of disengagement, and there's all these productivity studies out right now that people aren't as productive as we were a few years ago. And I think a lot of people have been like, well, the way to get that back is to turn the cameras on. And I don't know if they're right or if they're wrong, but to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. That keeping cameras on all the time makes you more productive. But I think probably a lot of people have kind of concluded that already, and so that's just going to be their culture going forward.
Mm, yeah, that's probable. It's too bad too, because people are tired enough as they are.
Yeah, well, I find it very, for me at least, Badger has been back in the office for a long time, and we have offices in Europe and we have offices in America, and they're, I guess you'd call them a hybrid environment. People are there, 4 days a week, but which ends up being 3 days a week half the time because of vacation and the heating guy coming, etc. But I do think that it was very exhausting for a lot of people, especially extroverts. I think it's very exhausting to like be alone in a room and you're never put your shoes on all day and
Oh,
be
tough.
be it do 8 meetings from your guest bedroom. I think it's pretty painful for a lot of people. So it certainly was for me.
So tough. All right. Well, then now that we have ABC, we could probably go to the road. And I will say that it really depends on what the presentation is. But a lot of times I will tell you that I check into a lot of places where once I'm in my room, I know that I have 2 hours or 3 hours or sometimes even an hour till an A presentation. And that is a hard moment. But if you have the right things with you, you can make it not so hard. I do tend to favor my Yeti, even though it takes space in the luggage and I have to bring less clothes. I'll bring the Yeti and I'll bring two clip-on lights. Mine are on the alligator clips, so they have those flexible metal, I think it's called alligator clips, where they have
They
that
are, yeah.
neck or gooseneck or something. There's a name for it, where you have the
Hmm.
long metal thing. So those are the three things that I definitely allow to be in my suitcase. I don't bring an Ethernet cord, even though a hard wire is optimal if you're in a hotel, especially if you're doing any kind of large presentation, but it's just too hard. And these days they don't have them. So you have to go by the Wi-Fi. If you're doing a real A presentation, when you check in, you can ask if you can have a room that's closest to the router. And sometimes that will make a difference to make sure that you're not going in and out during the presentation.
Great advice. I've never thought about that. But yeah, I have clipped in, I have plugged in, with the, and I carry a Ethernet cable around with me. But
If you can get it, it's getting harder and harder to find a hotel with an active Ethernet port.
that's a
So
good
it's
point.
great if
Yeah,
you
I
can get it.
guess.
We call
Yeah,
it. But what I
yeah.
do is I walk into the room and I start doing what we call the 360 spin. So when we're training teams in this content and we're going in to teach whole sales teams to do this, we have them all pick up their laptop in their home office and they spin 360 degrees because what they're looking for is what are my options in this room that look the best. So you just pick up the laptop, you turn on your self view. No, this way I could see the bed. No, this way I could see the bathroom. Well, this way's got a window behind me. I'm going to look like a silhouette. And you find what's your best option. And then
Mhm.
you begin stacking. This is where the Instagram post that I mentioned about the baby chair and the ice bucket come in handy is you do need your laptop to be high enough so that you're making good direct eye contact to the camera. And in a hotel, that's not always easy because usually the coffee table and the desk are low. So some combination of my hardback rolly suitcase, an ice bucket, 4 towels,
I was going to say I used my
it
suitcase
works.
flipped on its back, so
Yep.
the wheels
Yep.
up.
That's what we do. That's what we do. And once you get it, then you look at it and you look at your self view and you say, is there a sense of relaxed status to this look? Am I lit? Can you see me? Is there not light behind me making me a silhouette? Is there not light really hard on one side of me because there's a window on my right and really dark on my left? These are the things that you take a little time to work out. And then you have to put all that production aside and try to relax into the conversation.
How can I make this Las Quintas project status?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, it's pretty hard because most of the art is pretty bad, and you don't want to have that art. You don't want to have the hostage video with nothing behind you. So a lot of times I'll pull the curtain halfway, and then I'll do a little wall with a piece of a painting, like I'm styling it. So there's a little bit of a few elements that make it look a little less tacky.
So are you then sitting on the bed and you've moved the little table out, or how, or are you, because I have found if
Very
I'm,
rarely can I sit on the bed because then you'd see the bed, and the bed is a strange thing to show up in a business call. You don't want the door open to the bathroom, and you don't wanna see a bed. I would
yeah,
say those are rules.
I've tilted the camera so you can't see that I'm sitting on a bed and you just see the wall behind, because a lot of times it's like the little, if you're at the desk, it's pointing to, it's got the bed right behind it and you
Mhm.
can't cut it out, or the lighting's wrong or something. It's very tricky. It's the hotel room is not made for this.
It's not, and, sometimes if you know you're gonna be in a really icky place with really bad Wi-Fi and your whole brain is gonna be distracted on, "I look icky, I sound icky, I can't trust this connection," change it to a phone call because we all sold for years and years and years. Billion-dollar deals were done on a good old-fashioned telephone, and people felt connected, and if you can trust that medium better than you can trust this medium, switch it.
Yeah, and And if it looks bad, you can always change it last minute too. You can just be like, "Oh, I had to call into the Zoom because I have really weak Wi-Fi in my hotel. It's down or something," and everyone understands that, right?
Yep, they sure do.
No one
So now
thinks we're
we've got
crazy.
all this tech set up, and then we wanna talk about, well, what else? And that would move us into
Oh,
the
I have
realm of.
one more question on
Oh, yeah, sure.
backgrounds versus virtual backgrounds. Do you I guess we spent a lot of time talking about how to adjust that background, but is there
Mhm,
like I just use a virtual background that I'll pop on whenever it looks a little sketchy. And I actually like on this podcast, for example, I always use the same virtual background because just for the consistency, because sometimes I'm, out of the Europe offices, sometimes I'm out of America, sometimes I'm out on the road, so I just to have just so all of our YouTube videos line up very nicely and look the same. I use a virtual background. But are you always against those because of the fuzziness, or do you like them sometimes?
Now, earlier in the pandemic, I was harsher because they were worse, and B, I
Mm,
didn't know what they meant to people. So I didn't really understand the stress management of a virtual background. The fact that when you cannot have to worry about your house and your kids and whatever you have that's messed up your environment, it's really soothing to be able to do it. But my job is to go into organizations and upskill their sales teams to have maximum impressiveness. And so I have to tell you my opinion that I think that
mhm.
a styled physical is more impressive than virtual. I would also say that the new blurs are really nice. I think that that's a nice compromise, the new blur. But if I was coaching you, I would say that you're a little bit low in the frame. You've got
Mhm.
almost as much above you as below you. So we would come in and we would say, if you moved a little closer, if you move the camera a little down, what would happen is your eyes and your smile and your face would be a little bit larger because you're taking up more of the frame. And we would just have more in personness. We'd feel like we were just a teeny bit closer together.
Yeah, it's funny, this setup, and I didn't used to have it this way, but I've got my monitor, if I put it on top of the monitor, it's like looking down at me, so I put it on this thing off to the left of my monitor, but that means, when I'm looking at you over here on the monitor, that means it's a silhouette, which I was like, "Oh, okay," people know what I look like, but I think it
Yeah.
is better if you're, like, up and looking at the camera and, interacting with it, but then if I'm doing that, then I can't see you, so I have to
Yes.
pick.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the give and take of eye contact because right now I am I'm losing to give you something. I'm looking in the lens, which means I cannot enjoy just looking at the person. For
Right.
me, what's more fun and more connective and more relaxed for me is to look at you like this. And for listeners who are just listening, I'm looking down at him. Now, the listener does no longer has my eye contact, but I'm happier because I get to look at a person. And it's
Right.
all about this give and take. We know that if you're delivering the big line, if you're doing the big pitch or asking for the money or saying your brand statement, look at the camera. If you're needing to relax a little bit or it's their turn talking or you already know them really well, you can look down at the person and you're going to get comfortable after a while just flowing back and forth and back and forth. One trick that you can use is in Zoom, especially if you put the thumbnails at the top, that means that you're only flicking your eyes down an inch and a half to grab that little thumbnail of the person. It's still not as fun as looking at the whole person, but you've got less distance to travel between
Yeah.
making eye contact with the camera and making eye contact with the person.
Yeah, and that's what I do. I have the thumbnails at the top. And I think that's really nice. You get a very similar experience, I think, as looking at the whole thing. You just looking at the small one.
Yeah, you
You
can
know,
see a
I
gruff expression or a nod or something like that.
exactly. And maybe this gets less weird and less weird over time. Maybe the technology gets better. Just like the blurring has gotten better and the backgrounds have gotten better. Maybe we just get better at it and more accustomed to it. But it's definitely you know, for in terms of connecting with other humans, I place it at a very, very distant second to being in person. When I take a meeting, it's very easy for me to forget a meeting over, like forget the person or forget the interaction if it was over Zoom. But if it was in person, like it sticks with you forever. You just don't
Oh,
forget someone
yeah.
that you. I don't know. Maybe we adjust over time, but right, there's something about shaking someone's hand, looking them in the eye, talking to them, that sort of thing. I I'm not sure why that is exactly, but I've definitely had that experience a bunch of times, and I have a pretty good memory for faces, but I'll be like, "Did I meet with this person? Who is this?" And they
That's so
look
funny.
familiar. Their picture looks familiar, and I'll look it up, like, "Oh yeah, I had a meeting with them," but it was like, it was over the computer. So
I miss that too. Well, speaking of the handshake, though, this is one of our most important pieces of sales content is one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they enter the virtual room is they do what we call skipping the handshake. That means they put their slides up while the person is in the waiting room. And so when the person enters for the very first time, they meet you as a little tiny thumbnail with a big fat slide. And that means that you never have the moment where you go, hi, and you look at the camera and they look at you and you sort of shake hands with them and they shake hands with you.
yeah,
This is a critical moment to first say hello, come in, meet the person, be present, get a vibe of each other, and then move into, now let me share my screen. And that's probably one of the big no-nos that we would say if we had to list the top, I'd say top 3 big no-nos is entering with the slides already up.
great advice. Great advice. That's definitely something people should keep in mind because that's it's so many so many things. There's so many little things to think about with this new medium, I think.
Oh man, there are. I mean, there's the no-no of not reading on camera, very, very difficult not to do. What we teach is something that's really visual. It's going to be a little hard on a podcast, but we call it a bird's tail. If you imagine little post-it notes that are stuck to your computer all the way around so that they fan out like the tail of a bird. And on each one of the post-it notes, in the clockwise order that you'll talk about them, are your points. So instead of actually reading anything where your eyes are moving side to side, you kind of flick to the left and you grab a bullet point and you flick up and you grab another bullet point and you flick to the right and your eyes are moving in a way that sort of kind of looks like a person thinking, but you're
Hmm.
actually grabbing content. The other wonderful thing about the bird's tail is you can't really put paragraphs on the post-it notes, so it forces you to be more intimately familiar with your own content, and therefore you only have a word or two to get your cue as to what's next in your presentation. It automatically creates more prep.
It described the. I'm having a tough time visualizing how you're putting the post notes on to make them stand up. How do you keep your peacock tail from just not falling over?
So you take a little Post-it on the lower left part of your screen and you put it coming off to the left, like you tape it to the actual screen.
Hmm.
And then another, and you go all the way around. So each little Post-it note is glued on. It's not attached to the rest of the tail. It's completely independently glued. So you have
Ah, okay.
Post-it notes. We use the long ones that are sort of like a half an inch by 2 inches.
Hmm.
And so you keep gluing them around, Post-it, 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 all the way around, each independently glued to the screen. And so when you finish, you have this nice semicircle of Post-it
Got
notes
it.
that have the content on it, and then it looks a little bit like the tail of a bird.
Gotcha. I think that's a great little tip.
Yeah.
What other things besides the being in the room to do the virtual handshake? What other things can we do to first impressions are so important, right? When you're building a new relationship, what else can we do? Because I feel like that's one area that we really lose in this virtual world is the building of the relationship. How can people make a bigger impression, better impression, to create to start build the building blocks and even to build on a relationship that already exists but in this virtual setting?
Yeah, simple little one. You know when that little buffering moment is happening when they're about to appear? Just smile. Smile so that when they come in, you smile at the beginning. And it's so we're all so exhausted, and we're also exhausted from being in these boxes that we're letting our tell show that we're gloomy or tired or exhausted just at that one moment. If you can't pull it together any other time, hi, welcome, like a host in a coffee shop or a good restaurant. They're coming into your room. So smile. It's a really big one. Another thing is to keep slides blisteringly short. As soon as you go to a giant, dense slide with a lot of graphics and text in this medium, it's just think of it as 3 times as boring as when you do that in person. And it's actually already pretty boring when you do it in person, but something
Yeah,
about virtual, you need to be crisper, shorter, smaller, tighter, because everybody has a low tolerance for being here in the first place.
it's got to be less Hitchcock, more TikTok.
Yes, that'll work.
I just made that up, but you can keep that. That's for you.
That'll work. I'm writing it down as we speak. Yeah, and that's hard too when you're on the road. You're going from, there's something that happens when you go from meeting to meeting. You have this natural preparatory sense of you're in the car or in the lobby, or I duck into the ladies' room sometimes just for a minute to myself before I walk in. And you have that natural habit of preparing. So you need to mimic that in the virtual realm to insert 10 or 15 minutes, 30 minutes if it's an A. Sometimes I have an hour free before a meeting if it's an A plus, where you're just relaxing, you get your water, you got your notes, you review the person. Maybe you see if there's any videos online of them talking, you see their website again, you remember what you talked about last time. Preparation and getting really comfortable before they arrive is a big part of the presence that you'll have when they enter the room. And this is such a big thing when we're teaching intact teams, because once they all start to have those little wedges of time, they can turn it into a team norm, and then no one has to feel like an outlier for doing it. Super important to the charisma that you will eventually bring into the room.
That's great advice for me. It's funny when I was a bag carrying salesperson, I would always have my notes and I would write them in my meeting invites. So I would have them on my BlackBerry. This is back in the day, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
so and I would try to get an important meeting. I would get to it early. I would sit in the car. I would go through my notes. I would think it through, kind of bring everything to bring the important stuff up on my mind. Kind of think it through, basically. Now my alarm on my phone goes off. I jump into a Zoom 30 seconds later, right? Like so
Yep.
I think this is a great point that's definitely is something that I've skipped.
It's easy to skip. We're being pressured to not have those empty spaces, but that's actually in all of the other work that we do, we teach a lot of that. So we're very biased on there should be space in the workday.
Makes a ton of sense. How let's talk about some of the things that you lose and how we can make it not so bad. So, a salesperson, they walk into the room, they're one of the skills that we have is we're figuring out who supports us, who's kind of on their heels with on making this purchase, who's leaning in, who's leaning back. They're reading the room. How can we do some of that in the virtual world? How can we not lose all of that when we're here in the virtual world?
You can't keep too much of it. There's very little. This is a very difficult experience of speaking into a void that we simply have to do as part of our jobs now, and that's very, very difficult. We say that you raise the real and you lower the ideal, and that means that you work as hard as you can to raise real aspects of feedback or reciprocal cueing. So, for instance, sometimes you can tell that the person who's not talking is the P&L holder. Sometimes you can tell when they're very demonstrative and they take over, you have a sense, oh, that's the boss. Sometimes you can, as you said, by body language, tell when people lean back or lean forward or start multitasking that you're losing them and you better go to the next slide. But it's hard. It's really hard. The lower the ideal part is we just have to say to ourselves that preparation is the only protection we have from sucking in this medium. And if we prepare and we prepare and we have our best, then you just kind of have to bungee jump in and not worry so much about who's doing exactly what every single second. You just have to give it your best, which is then going to be best based on your preparation.
Yeah, it's hard, but you can't, you know, hear people's feedback. I guess you can still see their nodding heads. You can tell if they're like, doing other things in their computer at the time. But it's hard to see if you really have people. I mean, this morning I was, giving a talk to, I don't know, it was probably 75 people or something, but they all work at the company that I run. So it's it it's less
Not the
stressful, I
same.
think. It's really hard to give presentations to groups of people, and it's stressful to give presentations to groups of people when you have no feedback, when you're just kind of speaking into the
Oh, it's
void of
terrible.
mutes, right? You're like, is this thing on? Tap, tap, tap.
Yeah.
Are you guys still with me? Do you hear me? Like,
Oh,
I
it's
definitely
terrible, especially anything comedic or lighthearted, or you try to make a joke and it's just, woo,
that's the
it's painful.
worst. Yeah, like like I make a joke and like that we've got the clapping thing in Google Meet now, and so like I'm like I'm like waiting for the clap. So like, was that funny enough for a clap? But like I would have gotten
Oh,
smiles if we were in person, right? So that just that jumped out at me again this morning. I was just like, this is the this. But we kind of I have to do a lot of internal meetings virtually because our team is in 3 continents, so
mhm.
it's I guess 4 continents.
The
But
phrase to keep in mind is assume the positive. If you will not know whether it was funny or not. You will not know whether they thought that was clever or whether you sounded smart. Assume that they did, because
I
that
want
will
I
keep
want
you
I
on.
want the feedback. I want to know that they thought it was funny.
I know, I know. Go, you have to get them all together for all hands, uh, bowling or lunch or something and do it in person. You're not going to get the same kind of feedback here. That's the part that is raise the real and lower the ideal. Lowering the ideal means don't be attached to what you had before. Try to work within this medium.
Yeah. Um, what about authenticity? How can come across as an authentic human in this medium in the way that you can, so many. I think being likable and connecting with people, it's a really important thing in sales, and people buy from people they like. How can we be likable, and how can we approach the likability and authenticity that we can get in person, when we're virtual?
Nice. I think that authenticity is, again, it's been sort of a beautiful side effect of this time that we've had together, but authenticity should show up in your content, not in your physical space. So I don't think that authenticity is about, I didn't feel like blow drying my hair, so I came with it wet. I don't think authenticity is about, my house is a little messy, please forgive me. These are, again, places where you lose status and power in the room. And whether you like it or not, polished is impressive. So, and you can go too polished too. It's really important for me to say that being too polished or too put together can have a feeling of coldness in this medium too. You have to be really careful. But what you say, not where you're sitting when you say it, but what you say is the place for authenticity. If it's been a hard quarter, maybe in not in every sales situation, but in certain places where people say, "Woo, it's been it's been a quarter," or if something's going on with your family, find a delicate and appropriate place to allude to that, or anything that is a little bit of a tell or a reveal to what's real for you. If you have an opinion about something, these are the places to share your authenticity, not I was authentic, so I didn't shave.
Yeah.
That's not authentic.
Well, another challenge, holding people's attention, and so not just connecting with them as humans, but also just I find keeping people's attention is more challenging, and maybe for a lot of reasons probably, but in this virtual world, are there ways you can present, or you words that you can choose to be more, to hold people's attention?
Absolutely, and I'm watching our time, so I know we're almost done. Maybe I'll give you this as the capper. It's one of my favorite tools. It's called a verbal highlighter. And what you do is you imagine what you're going to say as a script. Sometimes people write out their scripts or key phrases or value propositions and they work on them. And if you were doing a script, you would use a yellow highlighter to say, this is the word that deserves emphasis. So, the company you were telling me about that you run maps sales targets, if I'm saying this correctly, right? We can tell you, let's say we can tell you the exact location of your people. You wouldn't say we can tell you the exact location of everyone. You'd say, we can tell you the exact location. That is the part of the sentence that deserves the verbal highlighter. And so you can't put it on everything, but you better not put it on nothing. Pick the places where words deserve your emphasis and your message will be more charismatic.
Well, that is fantastic advice. So, Juliet, where can our listeners read more about your work? How do they learn more from you? How can they reach out to you?
We would love to hear from them. This particular topic, the virtual presentation skills topic, is found at julietfunt.com/VPS. and people can learn about ways that we can help them or even access more content.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Juliet. It's been another great episode of the Outside Sales Talk. If you work in field sales, you love Badger Maps, the #1 route planner, helps you sell 20% more, drive 20% less. You can get a free trial at badgermapping.com. If anyone can think of any other sales reps that would benefit from learning what Juliet's taught us today, definitely share the love and forward this on to them. Take care until next time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to summarize what Juliet's taught us today. So with any medium that you sell with, you want to create a vibe that makes people feel engaged. Not all skills translate from selling in person to selling virtually, obviously. You want to take time to master both your selling in person skills, as you probably already have, and also take some time to master these virtual selling skills so that you can maximize the opportunities you have in front of your customers. You want to have intentionality when it comes to your virtual presentation. You want to think about the camera angle, the lighting, and the audio. With the camera, you want to make sure people can see your face well and that you're centered nicely in the frame. You want to use a good external microphone like a Yeti, and often it's best if you can get one of the plugged-in microphones as opposed to the Bluetooth. You want to use a background that is very professional and also not distracting, and at the same time, not too personal. Lighting, it's great if you can use 2 ring lights so that you put one on either side and it kind of lights the face better. I don't do that myself, but I'm not that pretty. So when you're setting up for a virtual presentation, do the 360 spin. So find the best part of the room for the background of your call. And if you aren't confident with the background, you can always use an auto-generated background like I am right now, or you can also switch the meeting to being a phone call. Don't forget the virtual handshake. You want to be in the frame when your customer comes in. Don't already have switched to the presentation, and take some time to smile and chat before starting the presentation. Avoid reading your screen and kind of letting people see that you're going left, right by using Post-it notes around your screen with the notes that you need for your presentation. That can be a nice way to make it look like things are coming up off the top of your head. I'd never heard of that before. That was a great one. The bird tail. Keep slides even shorter when you're presenting virtually than you would normally. People's attention spans are lower. It's harder to communicate with them. They're, a lot of times not on the right screen. And so you've got to keep your ideas simpler and shorter and cleaner than what you'd be able to communicate in person. You want to take time to prep before you join a virtual meeting, just like you would in person. Think about your routine that you would have before giving a big presentation. You want to still do that and put yourself in the right headspace before giving a virtual presentation. You're not going to get the same feedback or be able to read the room the way you can when you're in person, when you're presenting virtually. The trick to get around that is just assume the positive, assume that they think you're funny, even though it's actually kind of like podcasting. I can't hear you laugh, but are you laughing? Was this funny? I don't know. But assume the positive when you're in these situations, and that helps keep you in the right headspace. And that's always a tough one for me when I'm speaking into the void. But there we have it.